A man stops to help a woman change her flat tire at the side of the road. A simple act of kindness he's done before, but this time, the consequences are anything but ordinary. The next morning, a black SUV arrives, its presence hinting at a chain of events that will change his life forever. Life for Rick was not exactly a bed of roses. From childhood until his old age, Rick had been through so much, mentally, emotionally, and maritally. As a child, Rick grew up with toxic and abusive parents who would beat the living daylight out of him and verbally abuse him at the slightest provocation. At age 9, he managed to get away from his biological parents, but he didn't do so well with his foster parents, which resulted in Rick making a lot of bad decisions during his teenage years. As a teenager without parents who cared for him, Rick dabbled into the world of drug addiction. For the greater part of his adult years, he struggled to break free from the chains of addiction. Unfortunately, by the time he was able to get clean, he had lost his marriage, his children, and the opportunity to work at the company of his dreams. After several failed attempts to get his wife and kids to return to him, Rick finally gave up and accepted that it was his fate to live and die as a lonely old man. Thankfully, he had managed to get a job at a pizza shop in a distant part of town. With his little earnings, he could afford to take care of himself and his basic needs. Unlike other men his age, Rick didn't have many friends. His only friend was his neighbor, Mr. Freeman, who lived down the street. Sometimes, whenever Rick was bored, he would go down to Mr. Freeman's house to spend time with him and his family. Mr. Freeman was one of the people who helped Rick break free from his addiction. He also helped Rick get the job at the pizza shop because he knew Rick needed a steady source of income. In return for all the love and support Rick received from Mr. Freeman, Rick became a loyal friend. Sometimes, he would help Mr. Freeman do handiwork around the house. Aside from Mr. Freeman occasionally visiting, Rick never had anyone else at his house. Each time the doorbell rang, Rick was sure Mr. Freeman would be at the door. One day, after working a late-night shift, Rick was driving home in his old truck when he spotted a young woman bending over her car tire with her phone flashlight in her mouth. Rick didn't need anyone to tell him what was happening because he could tell from a distance. At first, Rick wanted to drive past her. It was already very late at night, and he needed to get home on time to catch his favorite TV crime show. But as he drove closer to where the woman was, he saw how frustrated she was, struggling with the car jack. Without thinking twice, Rick pulled over behind the young woman's car and honked to get her attention. Immediately, the young woman turned in his direction and watched as Rick got out of his truck and walked toward her. "You've got a flat tire?" Rick asked in a concerned voice. "Yes, the damn tire must have picked up a nail or something," the girl responded, frustration evident in her voice. "Okay, let me help you fix that," Rick said as he bent over to raise the car with the jack. He noticed that the young woman seemed hesitant to let him help initially, but he understood why. It was late at night, and it wasn't common for people to stop and help strangers at that hour. "So where are you coming from?" Rick started a conversation. He intentionally did so to help the young lady feel comfortable around him and ease her mind, as he expected. The more the young woman talked, the more comfortable she became. According to the lady, she was returning from a hangout with her friends, and about an hour into her ride back home, she realized she had a flat tire. After the lady shared her story, Rick opened up about himself. He told her he worked at a pizza shop and had just finished his night shift. Gradually, their conversation shifted from talking about their day to discussing their lives in general. The young woman didn't speak much about herself, but Rick shared a lot about his own life. He talked about his good friend and neighbor, Mr. Freeman, his life regrets, and how much he missed his wife and children. From all that Rick shared, the young woman could tell that Rick was remorseful about his past and was just an old man who hadn't received proper parental upbringing. A couple of minutes into their conversation, Rick took out the flat tire and replaced it with the woman's spare. When he was done, he grinned widely and said, "I really enjoyed talking to you." Then he walked back to his truck and drove away. The young woman had enjoyed talking to Rick, but was even more grateful for his help in fixing her spare tire. She thanked him wholeheartedly and drove off after Rick left. By the time Rick arrived home that night, it was too late to watch his favorite crime show, but he didn't mind. He felt more fulfilled from helping the stranded woman and enjoyed talking with someone other than Mr. Freeman or his family. The next morning, Rick woke up early to work out in his yard. After his daily workout, he did his laundry and cleaned his house before having breakfast. It was his day off, and Rick's intention was to spend the afternoon by himself. Then by evening, he would go over to Mr. Freeman's house to spend time with him and his family. Later that afternoon, Rick was watching a comedy show on TV when he heard a soft knock on his front door. At first, he was confused because he wasn't expecting any visitors, and he was sure that his friend Mr. Freeman was at work. When the knock came a second time, Rick was forced to go and check who it was. When he opened the door, he was surprised to see a man in an expensive-looking suit and two other men standing by a black SUV in front of his driveway. "You must be Rick, right?" the man in the expensive suit asked. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" Rick responded. "I'm Mr. Gerald, and I'm here on behalf of my younger sister," the man said. Then he showed Rick a picture of his sister on his phone. "Oh, did she get home safely?" Rick asked. Gerald's younger sister was the young woman Rick had helped change her flat tire the previous night. "Yes, she did, and she couldn't stop talking about the kind-hearted stranger who helped her last night. She also said you reminded her so much of our late father and his stories. As a matter of fact, she insisted that I come and see you today," Gerald said. "But how did you find me?" Rick asked. "Don't you remember? You told Sarah many things about yourself, including the street you lived on. All we had to do was talk to a few neighbors, and one of them pointed us to your house," Gerald responded. "Oh," Rick exclaimed, still unsure of what to say next. "Sarah told me to give this to you," Gerald said as he handed Rick a white envelope. By merely touching the envelope, Rick could tell what the content was. The moment he opened it to be sure, he tried to push the envelope back to Gerald. "No, I can't accept this. All I did was help a stranded woman," Rick said, "and all she wants is to thank you properly for your kindness. Please don't say no. Sarah will not be happy," Gerald insisted, pushing the envelope back to Rick. Without saying another word, Rick burst into tears and hugged Gerald tightly. "Thank you so much. Words cannot express my gratitude," Rick said as he struggled with tears. "Thank Sarah for me. Please tell her I really appreciate this act of kindness. Don't worry, Sarah will be here to see you when she's back in the country. She traveled this morning and will be away for a while," Gerald said. "Please, come in and let me make you a cup of coffee," Rick said, wanting to show his appreciation for Gerald's kind gesture. "Thank you, Rick, but you don't have to," Gerald replied. "One more thing. Sarah told me that it had always been your dream to work at the Golden Leaf Company. Well, I have great news for you. There's an opening at the company, and it comes with 3 months of training. I put in a good word for you, and we'll need your resume. Gerald said with a broad smile spread across his face. The minute Rick heard that, he burst into tears again, but this time he cried like a baby. His dream life was finally happening, and he could not believe it. To Rick, everything felt too good to be true. But 4 months later, Rick's life transformed in an amazing and unbelievable way. Through the money he received from Sarah and the pay from his new job, Rick could afford to move into a new neighborhood. Not only that, but he took his friend Mr. Freeman and his family along with him because they were the only family he had. He couldn't imagine living life without them. From that time, Rick maintained a great relationship with Sarah and Gerald, and the two continued to treat Rick like he was their own father. Most often, when you extend kindness to others, you often find that it comes back to you in unexpected ways, even ways that seem too good to be true. Love this story? Tap that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Let us know how this story made you feel with a single word in the comments. While you're at it, check out the video currently on your screen. See you next time.